Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're watching. Welcome to the Sky Ritter Show. You know, we just came off a week where we wrapped up one of the most historic diplomatic events in our age, and that is, of course, the 3-day visit of Chinese President Xi Jinping to Moscow. This comes on the heels of China negotiating a rapprochement or détente with Saudi Arabia and Iran that fundamentally restructures the entire geopolitical reality of the Middle East that has been in effect for over 4 decades now. That is a reality focused on American-based military balance of power, and now is focused more on collective economic cooperation. This is a very big deal. But what exactly happened when Xi Jinping went to Moscow? That's still up in the air. People have questions. What is the relationship between Russia and China today? Are they headed on a totally new trajectory, or is this simply a rehashing of old policy positions? Who better to have on to discuss this than our guest today, Vladimir Zakharov. Now, the world may know him as the father of Maria Zakharova, the foreign affairs spokesperson, but he is a distinguished diplomat in his own right, a Chinese specialist, somebody who has served in Beijing and is well positioned to help guide us through. So, sir, thank you very much for coming. And if you could just start off by giving us your impression of Xi Jinping's visit and what that means for Russian-Chinese relations going forward.
I believe that this visit was very significant and was multifaceted. I mean that it has lots of meanings in terms of the strategic, in terms of the relations between Russia and China, in terms of how China is going to change its attitude towards the United States. Everything is intertwined in that world. I totally agree with you that after Beijing managed to bring together the irreconcilable enemies, Iran and Saudi Arabia, and to negotiate the questions of restoration of diplomatic ties between them. China started positioning itself as a mediator, as a peacemaker. And I just think that this banner that President Xi is holding in his hands, he carried over to Moscow. I mean that first of all, that's about the war on Ukraine. And you certainly know that China proposed an initiative, made a plan which consists of several items and so on. I would like to share my take on that, and I'm going to speak about my personal position on that. This way, I will show some nuances that probably is something that I disagree with the official stance. I do believe that the negotiations that were held in Moscow were multifaceted, in a sense that that visit took place amid a very difficult time for Moscow. That's obvious, because we have actually survived through the 10th package of sanctions imposed by the United States and the EU on Russia, and actually the sanctions against Russia imposed by the United States are totally unlimited, endless. President Xi confirmed that despite the threats, warnings made by the United States and the allies, this way or that way, the Chinese officials, the Chinese leaders took a decision to pay that visit. And once this visit took place, and it really took place, it was a success. And it resulted in signing many documents. And I must say that today, we look at the development of our relations going beyond the horizon of certain years, and all the documents that were signed And all the statements that were made, the statements made by President Xi and by President Putin, attest to the fact that, generally speaking, this cooperation, this strategic partnership would pave a way to broader opportunities for us, both economic and political, etc. If we look at the international situation, then you know that Russia and China are voting sticking to the same position in the United Nations on regional and economic items. The two documents that were signed here in Moscow attest to the fact that this positioning, that rapprochement between Russia and China, this door and an agreement to reconcile our policy for the future, I think, would strengthen our cooperation, our interaction. I think that this brings about an evidence that amid such a hard situation for Russia, we can look forward feeling that, as the Chinese ambassador said prior to the visit, that we are back-to-back with China. Russia, in that sense, certainly is facing the West, and we now are witnessing a confrontation against the collective West, headed by the United States, and China certainly is facing the East, facing the Asia-Pacific region, which it finds a lot of unfriendly gestures made by the United States. And first of all, certainly you know, that's about an AUKUS that was set up thanks to interaction between Australia, the UK, and the United States. Another thing, that's a nascent bloc consisting of Japan, the United States, and South Korea. A new initiative proposed by Canada. And the Canadian Prime Minister was a little bit offended during the G20 summit meeting. He was offended by the words of President Xi. And therefore, the situation that has cropped out is the following. China now sees a very alarming situation, and certainly it has to react to that somehow, not just by strengthening its ability to defend itself, not only strengthening its partnership with the neighboring countries, but certainly China has to interact and strengthen its ties with Russia. And these go on in economic and political domain. Certainly, the negotiations on the military cooperation is held confidential. But in the recent years, as you know, that cooperation really took place. I mean, a military cooperation between Russia and China. And therefore, Russia, in terms of the symmetry of our relations, Russia used to be a giver rather than a taker in that cooperation with China, and probably that balance would change. But all in all, I may say that this very tense situation that has cropped out in the world, in the region, etc., it is, as we believe, here in Moscow, is connected to unilateral position of the United States. As far as the United States makes a lot of threats to Russia and to China at the same time. But once this pressure is exercised, then it means that you bring about even more rapprochement between China and Russia. And in that case, we say that we don't have any military cooperation. I mean, we are not allies. We're not allies in the military terms. But anyway, our partnership today helps us to strengthen our interaction in the Asia-Pacific region. And you know, certain documents were signed, and they attest to the fact that we can expect some joint drills in the Far East held by Russia and China, and further on we're going to strengthen our cooperation in all spheres. So, in a nutshell, that's it. This is my take on that visit. And I think that the next year question would be about Ukraine. And speaking about Ukraine, I may say that the Russian president expressed a very cautious position. He said that the Chinese plan deserves every attention, and Russia would consider that. But in my opinion, this plan contains certain items which not necessarily meet the Russia's interests. Why? First of all, this is about the restoration of the territorial sovereignty of Ukraine. Today, this is not possible. This is unrealistic. Many Russian military paid their lives for that, and we released a lot of territories, liberated a lot of territories that were populated by primarily Russians. And if tomorrow we sit at a negotiations table, Russia would speak from strength in terms of what has been done there. So we have regained Crimea, Donetsk and Lugansk were regained by us, and other republics that were recognized by Russia as the Russian territory, they again are recognized as legitimate territories belonging to the Russian Federation.
Well, what